All right, yeah, thanks, John Gill, for the kind introduction. I know one day it will come when I served on his PhD committee that it will be his turn to grill me. So, all right, so I'll talk about Internet of Medical Things. Let me get hang of this remote. Is this working? Oh, not too much. Okay, all right. I'll talk about the Internet of Medical Things. We're entering this era of Internet of Medical Things where we have wearables, right? Wristbands, smartwatches, rings, wearables, right? So that can provide this long-term, non-obtrusive monitoring of patients, pretty much for the first time in the history of mankind, right? These devices are connected to the internet, right, over Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and cellular, and so on, that enable us to monitor these patients in real time and interact with them. We have cloud computing backend, right, that allow us to easily scale up, right, the storage and computation to process these data at scale. And then, of course, we have machine learning analytics that enable us to predict outcomes and support intervention, right? So this is really becoming a very powerful tool for healthcare, and I'll talk about what that means, right? So first, in terms of data, right? So today's, if you take any of the cheapest wristbands, right, you get step counts, heart rate, and sleep stages, right? So that means we can do these studies in a very cost-effective fashion. But of course, we are gaining sensing modalities every month, right? So we can do SpO2, we can do skin temperature, breathing rate, and stress, and so on, right? And 500 plus million people bought them last year alone, right? So this is truly an unprecedented capability for longitudinal monitoring of our patients and everybody, in fact, right, outside hospitals. But just having this data itself is not directly useful to healthcare. No clinician will be looking at your minute-by-minute heart rate data continuously all the time in order to figure out what's wrong with you, right? So in fact, we have to be able to go from these very, very fine-grained wearable data to high-level clinical outcomes that are useful for healthcare and useful for improving patient outcomes. So these wearable data are fine-grained, and they are also noisy, and we lose much of the data when worn in the real life. Right? So these are all challenges that we have to deal with, right? Namely, how do you do reliable prediction of clinical outcomes despite the limitations of these real-world data? And just predicting outcome itself is not enough, right? Because in medicine, ultimately, what's going to make a difference is intervention, right? So that we can change the patient outcomes, right? So ultimately, we have to be able to go from just predicting outcome to predicting treatment response, right? We have to be able to tell if I put this patient on this particular treatment, I'm going to get a positive outcome versus that other treatment, right, for the other patient, right? So that's basically precision medicine that everybody is talking about in the healthcare world, right? And finally, we want to show that we can scale these predictive models, right? So sometimes we are dealing with a patient population that you tend to get fairly small cohort of patients, right? So in many, many clinical studies, including many major studies, right? So we have to be able to develop robust models, right, with very limited amount of data. But on the other hand, right, you go to the public health domain where you all of a sudden have these thousands of people's data, then there you want to be able to exploit, right, the most powerful deep learning approaches, right, so that you can get the most insight and the most accurate predictions. Right. So I'm going to use 3 of the clinical studies that I'm part of, right, to highlight, right, these 3 dimensions of Internet of Medical Things. Right. First, I'm going to talk about this project where we're using Fitbit data and machine learning to predict postoperative complications of patients undergoing surgery. So this is an example to illustrate how you build robust machine learning models, right, based on a small patient cohort. Then I'll talk about a project where we look at the randomized controlled trials of a behavioral therapy, right, for depression of older adults, and how do you leverage that data to develop personalized predictive models of treatment response. And finally, we're going to look at, when finally you get this large amount of data from the community, how you can leverage deep learning to detect mental disorders in the community, which is becoming a very large problem, right, in the current era. All right, predicting pancreatic surgery outcome. Right? So this is working with a cohort of patients who are, have pancreatic cancer. Right? Pancreatic cancer is, one of the most serious forms of cancer with a 5-year survival rate of less than 5%. For these patients, right, pancreatic surgery is the only cure, but at the same time has extremely high rate of severe complications. Right? What this means is it's always a very, very tough decision for the patients and surgeons whether a patient is supposed to go ahead with the surgery. Because either way, there can be very, very serious consequences. So that's why it's very important to be able to reliably predict postoperative complications before the surgery occurs. This can be very informative as the patients and the clinicians make decisions, right, about the suitability of a patient going on that surgery. And it can also be used to trigger pre-operative interventions, right, such as prehabilitation, where you can put these patients on programs to make them more suitable for surgery. But this is at the cost of delaying the surgery, so you have to get that right. So in fact, right, in collaboration with surgeons, right, we are doing using, right, this Fitbit wristband along with machine learning techniques to improve patient outcomes through this continuous of patient care, right, from pre-operative clinic, right, to surgery and to outpatient recovery. Right? I'm going to specifically talk about predicting post-operative complications before surgery. Right? Basically, what happens is a patient will come and see their surgeon, right, for surgery planning about a month before the surgery. We gave the patient a Fitbit, right, so we keep track of his or her data, right, for about a month. Right? We build machine learning models. We predict the risk factors and how likely this person is going to develop severe complications after the surgery. Right? So the trial is ongoing. Right? So, and in this talk, I'll report the first set of results with 61 patients undergoing pancreatic surgery. About 40% of them indeed experienced complications after the surgery. Right? The kind of data we have are, as I said, the Fitbit data, right, heart rate, sleep stages, and step counts, as well as patient clinical characteristics that we acquire from the EHR, the electronic health record. Right? So in terms of machine learning approach, right, because this is, as you can see, a relatively small cohort, right, we have to avoid complex, namely deep learning models. And hence, we have to extract informative features from these wearable data, right, these wearable time series, and combine that with fairly simple and shallow machine learning models, right, in order to make robust predictions. And then we have to combine the wearable data and the patient clinical characteristics, which, as I will show, is actually rather important to improve the predictive reliability. All right, so basically we are looking at Fitbit data, right? So this is, the picture shows the step count, the heart rate, and sleep stages that you get, right, from a real user, right, using Fitbit. Right? As I've noted, right, so these Fitbit data is inherently fine-grained, right? These are minute-by-minute data. At the same time, they are lossy, right? We lose large amount of them. We have highly fluctuating daily yield from every patient, right, during the monitoring period. And they are obviously very, very noisy. These are some of the dirtier data that you have to deal with. So what we did was to develop this robust feature engineering pipeline. Right? So that's essentially is responsible for turning these fine-grained, noisy, and lossy time series data from Fitbit wristband and to some really high-level features extracted over the longitudinal monitoring period, then feed these features into the machine learning model alongside the clinical features we get from the electronic health record of these patients. So the notion of robustness runs through this whole pipeline. So basically it happens in 3 parts. So there's imputation of the short missing segments. That certainly is very common. But then we take every day's data time series. We extract daily features. So a vector of daily features from each patient and each day. Then we combine these time series of daily features into high-level features that finally feed those into the shallow machine learning models. I'll just talk a little bit more about the daily features. So as I said, you take 1 day of 3 time series from heart rate, sleep, and step. Then you derive a vector of features for that day. So that basically usually involve statistical features, so first-order statistics, max, sum, skewness, and so on, as well as second-order features, for statistical features from these data. We also did detrended fluctuation analysis, that capture local fluctuation at different time scales, as well as semantic features, Sedentary behavior is very important to a lot of the clinical applications, active information about the patients as well. So I want to note one thing that has sort of hinted at the importance of being careful, in dealing with missing data or variability in data yield day by day. So this is, for example, if you think about this example that I show at the bottom, daily sedentary time is very important. That basically refers to the period of time where this patient does not make any step, So basically has been still, stationary for periods of time, Clearly, the sedentary behavior of a patient play a critical role, in terms of the surgical outcomes, So that's an indication of activity and fitness, essentially. However, it's useful to note that the daily sedentary time is also related to how long the patient actually wear the wristband, So if I simply forgot to wear it, or I forgot to wear them most of the day, so I wouldn't certainly get much sedentary time. But that doesn't mean I haven't been sedentary most of the time, during that day, So you have to wrestle with the fact you have variability in the daily data yield, So to solve this problem is not too hard, which is standardization, So basically, if you take the daily sedentary time, you divide it by the daily samples you actually collected, So then you get a more standardized notion of how much sedentary time this person has had in that day. So give you another example of the notion of robustness, in feature engineering, So this is a high-level feature extraction, So if you look at the picture, to your left, So this is a time series of the heart rate inertia, during a 30-day monitoring period of this patient, If you look at these daily feature time series, you can clearly see this is noisy. So this is really difficult, to get any sense of a trend or the essence, of these time series, So it turns out denoising is absolutely important, for these very noisy data, So we end up using singular spectrum analysis, to denoise the time series of these daily features, So after you apply SSA, it becomes something like this. So that's something that's a lot easier to capture the trend, in these daily features. And also, you can apply a robust version of SSA that can also deal with missing daily features, What happens is there's a threshold that we apply on how long you have been wearing this Fitbit for a day. Right? So if you have been wearing it for very little amount of time, it's simply a bad idea to include that day's daily feature into your model, because that clearly is not, if I only wear the Fitbit for 30 minutes a day today, right, so it wouldn't be a good idea to take that data and incorporate that into your model, right, as a daily feature. Right? So basically, then what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of missing daily features as well, right? Because for the days where this person didn't wear the device long enough, right? So fortunately, right, this robust version of SSA is also able to, fill in the missing daily features, right, over the monitoring period, right? So then once you have done that, right, so then you can take the 30 days of monitoring and then derive high-level features, right, on the denoised data, right? You take mean, standard deviation, slope, you feed these into the machine learning models. I'll show you, how important this is coming up, right? So this is the result that we have gotten so far, right? So these are basically taking that the data set, right, from the 61 pancreatic patients, and then compare, right, the predictive performance in terms of AUROC, AUPRC sensitivity and specificity, right? We fix the model at a particular level of high specificity because you have to sort of get it right, when you decide someone, is going to develop severe complications because the implications, right, influence on that surgical decision. So one thing that we should really be proud of, right, in terms of computer science and data science is if you compare the NSQIP formula, which is used by all surgeons in America. So this is a surgical risk calculator that is sponsored by the American College of Surgeons. So if you compare the NSQIP's result, right, with our machine learning model results, it's based on a combination of clinical characteristics and the wearable data, right? You essentially get double the AUPRC, right, of the prediction, as well as triple the sensitivity at the same level of specificity, right? This is clearly making a difference, right, in terms of predictive accuracy. And also interesting to compare, so we built 3 machine learning models, right? So one, it just takes the wearable data and predict complication. The other just takes the standard clinical characteristics data, right, standard medical data, and build the machine learning model. Then we did one with the combination of the wearable features and the clinical characteristics. And you can clearly see, right, even though you get some level of performance with wearable data and clinical data alone, right, you clearly get much better performance when you combine the two, right? We also have some model interpretation results that basically suggest that clearly the wearable data and the patient characteristics are complementary to each other in nature, right, in terms of their contributions to the predictions of clinical outcome. All right, so then how important it was, right, to have these mechanisms to deal with the noise and the missing data, right, in the wearable data time series, right? So first, let's look at standardization, right? So basically, this is a table that compares, remember the standardization that's applied on daily features where we take into account the data yield of that day, right? It turns out that make a big difference, right? So the standardized version of the results turns out to clearly outperform the result without the standardization. This is a small example and a simple solution that make a big difference, right? So it's important to always, right, keep into account, right, the missingness of these data. And how about SSA, right, the denoising of the daily features? Clearly, this also make a very substantial difference, right, in terms of the if you just try to derive these high-level features from the original time series of daily features, you get actually fairly poor performance, right? You get a sensitivity of 37%, right? Versus once you apply the denoising, right, using SSA, right, you get, right, over 50% of sensitivity. Right? So all these, so that's what we mean by robust feature engineering, right? That has to be explicitly designed, right, to deal with the missingness and deal with the noise, right, in such data. Just to recap, right, on this first project, right, to predict clinical outcomes, right? So we can use this sort of multi-level feature extraction to go from this minute-by-minute wearable data, right, this very fine-grained data, to high-level outcomes, right, clinical outcomes, so that they can be used for healthcare purposes. And then it is essential, right, to have these mechanisms to make robust features, right, from these very noisy and lossy wearable data. All right, so that's promising, right? So what's next, right? So what's next is, I'll get back to this point later, but in healthcare, it turns out, right, so many of us have realized after working on this for a while, is just making predictions is really just first step, right? Because ultimately, if you tell me what's going to happen to this patient, I have to do something with that prediction, right, so that I could change the outcome, right? That's what healthcare about, right? So that's why it's very important to be able to predict treatment response, right? I want to be able to take a patient and says, if I put this person on a particular treatment, he's going to be responsive to that treatment and get a positive response, right? Versus what happens if I put him on a different treatment or not putting him on any treatment at all? What would be the outcome, right? This is what we mean by treatment response, and ultimately that's important, right? Because that directly impacts treatment decisions, right? So this is something that that we have been thinking about, and the one thing that always bothers or challenges, right, the deep learning, machine learning community is it is tough to estimate treatment effect. There's the entire community that try to, work on treatment effect in Europe's and deep learning community, for example. When you take these data, the problem is there's always factual and counterfactual outcomes, right? For any given patient, either he was treated or he was not, right? So but you wouldn't know what would have happened to this person if otherwise, right? That's a counterfactual outcome that you wouldn't know, right? So, but then we look at these problems, they say, it seems like we can cheat a little bit, right? Because one thing medicine does all the time, randomized controlled trials, right? So this is the ultimate scientific experiment to evaluate the effectiveness of any treatment, right? So in that case, we explicitly randomized patients between an intervention group and a controlled group, right? The intervention group and the control group look similar, right, statistically. And then one group is subject to treatment, the other is not, right? So that gives you an opportunity to estimate treatment response because you have both group of patients, right? So we put this to test, right? So basically this is a randomized controlled trial. It was a major study on a behavioral therapy on older adults who have depression, basically. And so this is a trial where we took 106 patients, right, with depression, and 71 of them were in the intervention group, 35 were in the control group. And then the intervention group subject to this digital behavioral therapy, and the control group didn't. And 6 months later, we do the evaluation. We figure out, right, what is the percentage of the intervention group patients who got depression remission, that depression become better, right? Versus the control group, right? We also do the same, right? The standard, way of processing randomized controlled trial data in medicine is statistics, right? So they do statistical analysis, right? So where you get a sense of the effectiveness of the treatment with statistical significance at a population level, right? So this is what we do for all the clinical trials, right? Including all these COVID vaccines, right, for example, right? So we do this, many people, then we do statistical significance analysis to see overall, right, this vaccine seems to work. Same is true for psychiatry, right? So basically, overall, this behavioral therapy seemed to work, right, for older adults with depression, right, in aggregate, right? What that doesn't tell you is whether it will work for a particular patient, right? This is, for example, a particularly serious problem in psychiatry because oftentimes, right, so it's hit and miss, right? You put a person on expensive long-term behavioral therapy and it didn't work, right? But even though overall it worked for 55% of the people, right, for example, right? So, this is why, right, the healthcare, right, the next, right, the current big wave in healthcare innovation is about precision medicine, right? The idea is to be able to personalize treatment so that that would be effective on this particular person, right? So essentially what we need to do is to do personalized prediction of treatment response, right, in order to achieve precision medicine. So essentially what we decided to do, we take this RCT data, right? We are going to, instead of doing statistical analysis, we build machine learning models, right, for both the intervention group and the control group, right? So that we can estimate the treatment response, right? Hence, we can drive precision medicine in psychiatry, right? So essentially what we had are, again, clinical data that were collected at baseline, right? These are the typical sort of, patient characteristics, anxiety scores and PTSD scores that were collected using surveys at the beginning of the trial. Then we collect Fitbit data, right, from these patients, right, in fact, we collect data over the entire 6 months, but for the machine learning model, we only use the first 2 months of Fitbit data, right? And then we measure depression outcome, right, at the end of 6 months, right, whether this patient had depression remission or not. Right, so how does this work usually, right? So usually, of course, we take the control group, right? So then we do something called risk modeling, right? We develop a machine learning model just for the control group, right? We say, oh, suppose this person is not, right, put on the therapy. What would be the outcome of this patient, right, in terms of depression? Then we build a separate model, right, for the intervention group, right? That's something that's called treatment-specific modeling, right? That's basically if we put this person on this therapy, whether he would get a depression remission, right? The problem, right, especially in mental health treatment, is usually you have very, very small group, right, of patients in these studies, right? So in fact, this particular clinical study I'm talking about is a major clinical trial, right? That took a long time and a significant amount of funding to get there, right? So, but you end up with 100 patients total, then you split them between the two groups, you get a rather small, right, patient population in each of the groups, right? So, and we know in machine learning you get all kinds of problems in overfitting and lack of generality when you have such a small patient cohort, right? So this is why what drove us to explore multitask learning, right, with one unified model for both groups, right? So the idea is if we build this, two-task model essentially on this combined, right, cohort of patients, including both the control and the intervention group, and then we are able to estimate, right, predict both the outcome without therapy and outcome with therapy, right? So that allows you to enlarge the training data set, right? That's very helpful, especially when you have limited amount of data. And then also exploit the similarity between the two groups, right? Remember the whole point of the randomized controlled trials is that both groups are statistically similar at the beginning of the trial, right? So there's a lot of common characteristics that you could explore, right, across both groups. In terms of getting to the model architecture, right, essentially this is what we end up building, right? So this is a multitask learning architecture where that comprises, right, 2 stages, right, 2 layers, right? One is a common layer that's applied on the clinical characteristics that were collected at baseline, right? This essentially learns commonality across both groups. Recall, right, these are data that's collected at the baseline when no treatment has occurred and the 2 groups of patients are intentionally chosen, randomized to be similar statistically. And then we have this group-specific layer, right? So that works on the wearable features, right? So this is, of course, to capture the differences, right, between the two groups. Remember, the Fitbit data are collected over 2 months, right, when the intervention group was subject to treatment and the other group didn't, right? So, intuitively, the data, the wearable data reflects, right, the differences that's made by the therapy. So then the next technical question we had was, how do you train and tune the multitask learning models, right? So for those of you who know about multitask learning, right, it's always this combined loss function that combines the loss in both tasks, right? So basically you have the loss of the intervention group and the loss of the control group, right, capturing the accuracy of the prediction for either group. Then you have a weight, right, so for each group, right? So that's the traditional approach. Of course, you have it's a hyperparameter you have to tune, right? So you try to adjust the contributions of different tasks. Of course, it takes some effort to tune, but more importantly, you can never pretty much achieve the best performance for both groups, right? Regardless what parameter you choose, right? So for example, if you look at this picture, as you increase the task weight of the intervention group, right? So of course, right, the predictive accuracy, right, the AUROC of the intervention group does increase, but at the cost of the control group just drops, right? So you can never make both groups accurate. So instead, right, if we take a multitask learning approach and also take this particular technique that we employ to learn the weights based on the task uncertainties in the training process, right? So that you don't have to sort of manually tune these weights, but rather it learn, right? Essentially it assigns higher weight to a particular data sample if it gives us less uncertainty. Right? So in this process, it optimizes both groups' performance automatically. Right? Right? So just some evaluation results. Right? So this is the first you want to look at is the group-specific models versus the multitask learning models. Note in the group-specific model, it also includes something that we call MTL1. This is basically we take the same model architecture from our multitask learning model, but apply it on one group at a time. Right? So that it's still group-specific models. First, of course, you can see that combining groups does help. Right? So the MTL models, right, trained on the combined groups does improve performance. And then if you look at the MTL fixed, which is sort of the hand tuning, right, as hyperparameters as the weights, right, versus the automatic dynamic tuning through the learning process, the dynamic tuning process does optimize the performance for both groups. Right? So certainly there are opportunities for these machine learning techniques to improve, right, the prediction of treatment response. To recap, right, so this is an effort to predict treatment response. Right? So this is crucial because personalized predictions of treatment response allow us to tailor treatment for each individual patient to get the best result. And this is the essence of precision medicine. Right? So, and we got the opportunity to exploit, right, data collected from randomized controlled trials that allow us to make, right, robust predictions of treatment response because it includes both groups of patients with a careful randomization. We think this can potentially have broad implications, right? Because in the world of medicine, there are tons of randomized controlled trials, right? So this is happening every day, and there's a lot of data being collected, right, from both the intervention groups and the control groups, right? So there's just infinite potential, right, to apply machine learning on these randomized controlled trial data to be able to estimate treatment response. That can have significant implications on precision medicine, right? And we also, right, talked about, right, multitask learning techniques can potentially allow us to exploit the commonalities among these groups as well as capturing the differences between them. So let me get to the last segment, last example of these IOMT research, which is to detect mental disorders in the community, right? In the year of COVID, this is a very, very significant problem, right? So in fact, right, mental disorders are prevalent, and more importantly, over 50% of patients are not recognized or treated, right? So hence, it would be very, very helpful, right, if we could detect mental disorders in the community, right, based on tools such as wearables, right? So from a technical standpoint, right, so this allows us to treat these data using an entirely different approach, right? Recall previous wearable studies that others have done and we have done, right, tends to involve fairly small patient cohorts, right? So, and then we have to rely on feature engineering and shallow machine learning models, right, to make predictions, right? Suppose we have a large data set, right, that's collected from the community, right? Then that allows us to exploit end-to-end deep learning on this very large data set, right? And we get to test, right, whether how effective deep learning would be, right, on a large community, right? I will not get into the details of this research, but I'll tell you about, right, the high-level results, right? So this was done on the All of Us program data, right? So the All of Us is a research program that's a collaboration between NIH and Fitbit, right? So that's recruiting many patients, right, with Fitbit. But importantly, they also collect the electronic health records data of these patients, right? So that you could essentially correlate the medical diagnosis and characteristics, right, with the wearable data. So after the filtering, right, based on our criteria, we end up with a data set of close to 9,000 patients with Fitbit data, right, including over 1,000 with mental disorder diagnosis in the electronic health records, right? So this is finally a relatively large data set that we can try deep learning on it, and we get to tell whether this is going to be effective, right? So these deep learning models, right, that we built, that we call WearNet, right, learn directly from the raw daily features, right, from these patients. It does not require feature engineering, which is helpful, right, because feature engineering is always hard and requires domain expertise. That's not always there. And then it integrates wearable and static data from the electronic health records. And the high-level results is deep learning does work, right, in terms of detecting mental disorders from a large community. And not only it doesn't require feature engineering, it actually outperformed feature engineering substantially. All right, so I want to wrap up and talk about, right, how IOMT is really poised to become a fairly important tool for precision medicine, right? Because we are able to make reliable predictions of clinical outcomes using this wearable data. And we can make personalized prediction of treatment response, and by leveraging this randomized controlled trial data. And we can scale our predictive models for both fairly small patient cohorts, right, to large data set from the community. So this is really going to unleash the power of wearables for healthcare. And I want to conclude my talk with a few comments, right, and sort of the lessons we learned over the course of doing this research, right, is how do we truly embed IOMT in healthcare, right? So our community and many other communities in computer science have been trying this for a long time, right? How do we go from some interesting MobiSys research, right, to something that's truly going to make a difference in healthcare, right? There are three things I want to talk about. The first advice or lesson, right, is it's really, in the end of the day, it's all about the interventions and changing outcomes, okay? So that is very important because it ends up, right, so predicting outcome is only the first step, right? So basically you have to make the prediction, use that prediction to change intervention, and then change the outcome, right? So that plays a major role in terms of how you think about your predictive model, right? It's not always just about, right, predicting, do a model with the best AOROC, okay? So you have to think about in what way can I predict this, right, so that I would allow clinicians to leverage this information to make a difference. That always has to be sort of the first order, first principle in the design of these predictive models. And a second high-level lesson is Internet of Medical Things, right? So the medicine part is really, really important, right? So having these benchmark data set is useful, and as we advance a lot of the machine learning techniques. But in the end of the day, you cannot really just have this simplified view of taking a data set, do a bunch of machine learning and do some predictions. This is going to help, right? Because I'll tell you, every time we do a project like this, it's always more complicated than we thought it would be, right? So it turns out the actual clinical insights, the domain knowledge, how do you interpret these data, right? What you should care about, what you shouldn't care about, how does intervention really work, right? So it really always changed what we initially thought it would be. Okay, so and certainly, our project that I've been talking about, right, has been these, wonderful collaboration, right, with clinicians and, hard work by students and fellows, both in computer science and medical school, right? So working closely together day by day. And finally, right, so thinking about the interventions, right? So which means whatever we do in terms of these machine learning have to be fed into the healthcare delivery system. Right? So we think, we generate a prediction, right? So our Python code, pop up a output, we're done with it. No, in reality, it's far from it, right? So basically what we have to do is to integrate all these IOMT systems and machine learning models with the informatics infrastructure and the clinical workflow of clinicians, right? Clinicians work with EHR all the time, right? They would not be looking at your apps. They would not be looking at, a separate Python code package that gives me prediction. Everything has to be integrated into that, curated, workflow with EHR for this to work, right? And also, right, ultimately to make a difference, right? So, artificial intelligence will never control healthcare intervention. Okay, pretty much, that's the nature of it, right? So it has to go through clinicians, right? Clinicians ultimately make the intervention, makes the decisions, right? So this is why there's all this research on human-in-the-loop AI, right? How do you work with clinicians? Explainable AI, how do you explain the information, present the information to the clinicians? There's more to it, right? So and this is certainly something that we have to keep in mind as computer scientists as well. All right, so I think I'll stop here and happy to be grilled by John Gill now. Thanks, everyone.